Well, welcome to a Wednesday night Bible study, First Baptist Church of Jasper, Georgia. Glad that you were joining with us tonight. Tonight we'll begin a study on the parables of Jesus. Tonight we'll begin a 4-week study where we will look at and compare and contrast parables. Some of these parables we'll find in multiple books of the Gospel. Some will just be in one of the books. So tonight, the parable comes from Matthew chapter 20, verses 1 through 16. This is the parable of the laborer in the vineyard. And so parables is this, before we get into this, parables were these, this is a symbol of sacred storytelling. It's a language that a lot of religions have used over the many thousands of years of communicating a message. And these parables were the teaching style of Jesus, how he talked to folks. He didn't use any systematic theology. So over the past several hundred years or more, so way longer than several hundred years, people have been using systematic theology, to explain who Jesus is, who God is, and trying to explain how God relates to the world. And so, this is so kind of totally opposite of what Jesus did. So, but within these parables, he often used these relatable objects. Because if we think about it, if we start using some of this systematic theology with folks who are interested in that will pay attention, and they're hooked at the beginning. But for some of those folks of us who are not interested in systematic theology, we tend to tune out. And Jesus had this amazing ability of using these universal concepts with these parables, finding things that all folks relate to, such as birds and flowers, animals, clouds, landlords, tenants, brothers, little children, and even women baking. So things that we can all relate to. Jesus used these relatable topics. So if a person of faith was around, or a person who was not of faith around, Jesus was able to find a way to connect with these people using parables. And these stories, these parables that Jesus used, were often about a way of countering some of the current conventional wisdom of the day and offering more of a transformational view, a different view, maybe an upside down way of looking at things. So Jesus kind of uses these parables to push against some of the normal, average, conventional thinking. So as we think about the conventional things that we hold on to as wisdom today, just think about Jesus pushing back on that and how uncomfortable that must have been for the people who were around him to think, well, you say it this way, if people around me all the days of my life have told me one thing and now you say another. And so these parables of Jesus often invite the hearer or the reader, now as us as readers, to see the world a little bit deeper, to move beyond our current place, our mindset, and to grow a deeper consciousness of how we carry ourselves as people of faith. So as we think about Jesus challenging the current worldview, we have to kind of think about that as we read the passage of how he would do that then, and we have to begin to think about what that means for us now. So if you have your Bibles and you would like to begin, we'll begin reading this passage here. I won't be going verse by verse. I'll read a chunk at a time, and then we'll kind of talk about it. Starting in verse 1. For the kingdom of heaven is like a landowner who went out early in the morning to hire laborers for his vineyard. So he uses the term kingdom of heaven. Matthew was writing to a Jewish audience, and Jews didn't mention the word God, and so he used the term heaven. That interchangeable, as you see in Luke, it's kingdom of God, and in Matthew, it's kingdom of heaven. And Jesus uses the relatable objects of the day were landowners, then in the vineyards and laborers, and we can all relate to people as people who work, people who do some type of work that, or people who may have been in a supervisory type role. We can all relate to this. So he goes out to hire laborers for the place that he owns. And after agreeing with the laborers for their usual daily wage, he sent them into his vineyard. So they made a contract. We all know what it's like to make a contract. When he went out about 9 o'clock, he saw others standing idle in the marketplace. And he said to them, "You also go into the vineyard, and I will pay you whatever is right." Oop, lost my place. Oop. There we go. Let's see. Went out. So then they went. Then they went. When he went out again about noon, and about 3 o'clock he did the same. And about 5 o'clock he went out and found others standing around. And he said to them, "Why are you standing here idle all day?" They said to him, "Because no one has hired us." He said to them, "You also go into the vineyard." When evening came, the owner of the vineyard said to the manager, "Call the laborers and give them their pay, beginning with the last and then going to the first." So the usual work in a vineyard for picking of these grapes was about a 12-hour day. So you can imagine the ones he called early in the day were exhausted. They had worked all day long, where these folks who had come in at different hours, maybe a little bit more energy, had not put in their time in the hot sun and used their body to work. So here comes the handing out of the payments. When those he hired at 5 o'clock came, each of them received a usual day's wage. Now, when the first came, they thought they would receive more, but each of them also received the usual daily wage. And when they received it, they grumbled against the landowner, saying, "These last worked only 1 hour, and you have made them equal to us, who have borne the burden of the day and of the scorching heat." But he replied to one of them, "Friend, I am doing you no wrong. Did you not agree with me for the usual daily wage? Take what belongs to you and go. I choose to give to this last the same as I choose to give to you. Am I not allowed to do what I choose with what belongs to me? Or are you envious because I'm generous? So the last will be first, and the first will be last." So here comes the handing out of the payment, and there's this hard turn of, the ones who only worked a little bit of time got the same amount as the ones who worked all day long. And the conflict begins between the landowner and the workers who worked last. The workers who only worked a few hours, they were probably tickled to death and went on and were able to use what they had to get what they needed. And so this tension happens with, we deserve more. They don't deserve as much as we do. And then Jesus says that saying that we often sometimes say in our rhetoric, that the last will be first. And when we say this statement, deep down, how do we feel about this statement? Like, how does it sit with us to think that the last would be first? If I was that man or woman working in the field all day long, if I could put myself in those shoes of those folks who were working, I don't know how I could hear those last words of the landowner. Especially when you've busted your back to get what you're supposed to get, and someone who works who works but not as much as you do gets the same amount. What would we think of a boss who did that? If they operated like that, especially if we'd been there a long time and the ones who worked a short amount of time got the same amount as we, I don't think we would have a high opinion of that boss. So here's some thoughts. One, there's, I guess in this passage, there's no hierarchy of merit that exists among the workers. And these payments define within this parable what is just. So this landowner, and Jesus telling the story, maybe is trying to use this divine justice of equality, that all receive the same goodness. And maybe it has to do with money, maybe it doesn't. Maybe that's the way that Jesus was trying to communicate, because we as people, we understand money and we understand work. When we work, we get money. When we don't work, we don't get money. So maybe it doesn't have anything to do with money. So what do you think the conventional wisdom was of the day that Jesus was trying to get the hearers of that story to begin to rethink? And it was challenging to the people of the first century, and it sits there and it pushes up against us as people of the 21st century as we read this passage. What do we do with it? What conventional wisdom does it push back on in our day? When we hear this story as a part of the gospel, if we're honest with ourselves, do we really like this passage? Do we believe it? And do we possibly think, and some people think that, how does, in the Western world that we live in and how we work, we get paid if we work, and if we don't work, we don't get paid. So, because I've wrestled with this passage for someone who's, just worked since I was, a teenager, cutting grass. Someone worked half the time that I did, cutting grass, and they got illness, I would be ill. Because it's not the way that we process in the Western world. It's not the way we've organized the world. Because there's a lot of us that we don't, some will take the money even if they don't earn it and they haven't worked for it. But there's many of us who, if we didn't do the job, we don't want the money yet. So this passage is a hard passage to wrap our minds around, to wrestle with, and to think is what is this goodness that the landowner is trying to communicate? I think it is beyond money, but we have to begin to think and open ourselves. So Jesus here is inviting the hearers of this parable to see beyond a cultural type of hypnosis, the conventional wisdom that we hold on to, that have been passed down to us, because sometimes that conventional wisdom in ways can be healthy, but in ways sometimes it might not be. And so it just invites us here to begin to think about that, and what does it mean to think about the divine goodness of the storyteller, Jesus, and what that is. How does that work for us? So I invite you to go back, reread the passage, wrestle with it, put yourself in the shoes of the landowner, because in a way, landowner, you can really help some people out. Put yourself in the shoes of the laborers. What that must have been like. Read between the lines. I invite you to do that. So next week, we will be looking at two passages. That we'll be looking at two parables together. The parable of the hidden treasure. So thanks for joining me this week, and I will look forward to being with you next week. Bye-bye.